to Deep Dives with Dogs. Uh, New name of this series. We'll try to see if it sticks, if everyone really likes it or not. But I'm gonna try to not move too much, uh, and try to keep more of a fixed camera so you can actually watch the dogs while I explain some of what's going on here. Try to give a little bit of maybe a lighter perspective from some of the things I talk about. But now on to the deep dive of the day. So if you had watched my short, if you didn't, obviously you don't have to go back and watch it, but I would appreciate the view, of course. But it is about Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. If you don't know who they are, I'll go through that quickly. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg are two Americans who are communist sympathizers, and they leak the Manhattan program's plans to the Soviet Union, which will allow the Soviet Union to get their own nuclear weapons. They are charged with espionage and then sentenced to death, and they are later executed. First Americans to be executed for espionage, not by espionage, but these are obviously very serious crimes, and some would say they don't necessarily understand why people would do this. But if I will be honest, in some ways, it's probably better that they did do this. Now, it's not great that they committed espionage. You know, a crime is still a crime. But realistically, one nation having all of the nuclear monopoly that they can is maybe not as good for world peace. We can actually see today nuclear deterrence is quite the common thing. People tend to not want to attack you if you have nuclear weapons, which makes a bit of sense, you could say. But the Rosenbergs, they still committed espionage, so it's one of those, for the greater of the world, maybe they actually did potentially a right thing. But for themselves and for their nation, not really. That's why this is always a more complex topic to talk about, because if we're looking at this from the 1950s when this happens, 1951 is when they're charged, 1953 is when they're executed. But if you're looking at this from that perspective, you would say, well, they did an awful thing, and there is no other side to this. But if you're looking at it from a nowadays perspective, you can really see it probably was one of the better things. And they were just regular people too. That's one of the things people kind of don't even really think about, is that these were two just regular people that just happened to support communism. They weren't like Soviet spies that were sent there and, you know, sleeper agents and all that stuff. No, it's nothing like that. It's just two Americans that were communist sympathizers and thought that they were doing the right thing. Now, they probably were in the grand scheme of things, but now, I will say, this doesn't necessarily mean, though, that no nation would have had a monopoly forever on nuclear weapons, or anything nuclear, really. Even before and during World War II, many nations were trying to do this. It's just that so happens that the United States is isolated. They have the wealth, they have the resources, and so they are able to do it. And, you know, the other people are in an active war. So they don't really have the ability to research complex nuclear theories and things like that to even test this. And some nations, for instance Germany, probably wouldn't have gotten nuclear weapons for quite a while. It was seen as Jewish science, and so it was seen very taboo in Germany to even talk about nuclear science. Now that was changing in some ways, and people still did things with it, because obviously nuclear science is something that it can just it can't be understated how valuable it is in many different ways. Nuclear energy, if you're talking about a war industry, weapons. However, uh, the ideological issues with Germany at this time really prevented them from studying it. But I do believe other nations would have eventually gotten nuclear weapons in the sense of they would have developed it themselves. For instance, the Soviet Union. They had a lot of German scientists, and yeah, they may have had the ideological differences um, or during the war. When they're Soviets now, who really cares if it's Jewish science? They're going to do it anyway. Um, and they never necessarily believed in that stuff anyway. It was just they had to for the ability to stay alive a lot of times. Um, but actually, the Soviets get some of the better scientists even in terms of what the Germans had at one point because they have obviously easier access to Germany. So they got some. That's why a lot of the space race, why the Soviets are so far ahead for so long. It's mainly because they got the better scientists, a lot of the better scientists when it comes to the rockets and things like that. So it's not. It stands to reason that eventually the Soviets probably would have got everything. But Julius and Ethel, you almost wonder what would have went through their heads during all of this, because when you're both of them, it's like, well, we're doing this for the Soviets, for communism. We will do this, and then your lives are taken from this. You almost wonder if what you do is the right thing or not. And who knows? Maybe they thought, well, we'll be martyrs for the betterment of the future for communism, something like that. It's hard to say. You never really know with some people. But um, that's going to do it for this video. If you like the video, leave a like. If you have some ways I can improve these videos, let me know in the comments. I really appreciate your feedback. And if you can, subscribe. It helps out the channel a lot. Thank you.